Hello, welcome to another edition of the Pace Report. I'm Brian Pace, reporting live here at the Blue Note here in Greenwich Village here in New York City. Vibraphonist Gary Burton is celebrating 5 decades in the industry, and tonight he's playing for the very first time with the Gary Burton New Quartet. This is your brand new quartet. This is the first time you've played. This is the first time at the Blue Note and for the world. Why did you choose these musicians?
Well, I'd actually played with each of them in different settings before, but not as a group. But Julian, the guitarist, Julian Lage, and I, we've been playing off and on together for about 10 years now. And I've been touring the last few years off and on with Antonio Sanchez. When I tour with Pat Metheny, he's been the drummer, so I got to know his playing and like playing with him a lot. And Scott, I actually played with the first time about 25 or 30 years ago, a special project at Lincoln Center with a small orchestra, kind of a classical and jazz kind of project that he was involved in, and so was I. So we all knew each other, but this was the first time we've come together as this particular group.
One of the things that you've done throughout your career is you've introduced and actually brought to the scene a lot of musicians, Pat Metheny, John Schofield, Larry Corea. That's part of the mentoring part of the musicianship that you've done throughout the years.
Yeah, I've noticed that musicians tend to fall into one of two categories. They either like playing with older, more mature and established players, and are more comfortable in that setting. And then the other approach is being drawn to playing with younger players who are still evolving. And I find that inspiring. I get new ideas and a lot of energy from playing with younger players. And there's that thing I call the unpredictability of youth. You know, they'll just do things that you don't expect or haven't thought of before, and sort of in their innocence stumble into things that are new and different. And I've always been drawn to that quite a bit.
I also read that you're really not a composer, but you have contributed some very important compositions throughout your career. What should fans expect out of the new quartet? Are you going to bring some new compositions to the table?
Well, I don't do much writing at all these days. When I was younger, first starting my own band back in the 60s, I did a fair amount of writing for the group. And every time we had a new record, I would contribute at least 2 or 3 songs to it and so on. But over the years, I wrote less and less. I don't get a lot of fun out of composing. I'm sure a lot of people do because they seem to enjoy doing it. For me, it just seems to be kind of tedious and slow, and I don't get much excitement out of it. And so it's just I've gotten older. Now I write a new piece about every 5 years or so. So I depend a lot on a nice collection of very talented friends who are always supplying music for me, whether it's Chick Corea and Pat Metheny or Carla Bley, or the people in my bands over the years who contribute a lot of music. Even in the new band, we have new pieces by Antonio, by Scott, by Julian, and so on.
grew up in Indiana, and growing up, how did you get exposed to the vibes, and who were some of your influences?
I often get asked, why did you choose the vibes in the first place? And the truth is, I didn't. I was 6 years old. My parents wanted all three children in the family to take music lessons of some kind, and my older sister already had started piano lessons. So they looked around to see what would be okay for me, and there happened to be a lady in Anderson, Indiana, named Evelyn Tucker, who gave lessons on the marimba and the vibraphone. And she didn't live far away, and so my mother took me there and signed me up for lessons. So that's how I started on the vibes. I didn't know one instrument from another at 6 years old. I was just doing whatever was put in front of me. But I kept playing. We moved away, actually, after a couple of years in Anderson at that point, and I grew up in the other end of the state down south, and I didn't have a teacher, but I just kept playing the instrument, getting sheet music from the music stores and so on, and learning songs, and sort of came easy for me. And the reason that I began playing with 4 mallets instead of the usual 2 was also part of the environment I was in. It was a small farm town. There were no other musicians to play with. I wanted my music to sound more complete. I needed harmony. I needed more notes. So I started playing with 4 instead of with 2 so I could play chords and make the music sound more real.
So basically, you pretty much out of nowhere developed your own style.
That's right. And when you grow up in an isolated situation, that's what happens. I mean, I did have access to recordings. The nearest record store was an hour away. And every week, every Saturday, was a big thing for me to, drive down to Evansville, and first with my father taking me until I was old enough to drive myself, and go to the one music store, record store place in town, and see what new jazz records had shown up. And that was, my first exposure to jazz, and really was, my introduction until I moved to the East Coast after high school and to go to college. And then I finally was in the midst of a jazz scene.
Interesting about your career is one of your first professional gigs was with the legendary Boots Randolph.
Yeah.
Explain that.
Well, Boots lived in Evansville. He had grown up in Kentucky, and his wife actually was from Evansville, so they had ended up living in Evansville for a while. And Boots, who was a saxophone player, started getting calls to play on record dates in Nashville. Nashville was about a 4-hour car ride. And Boots would go down once or twice a month and play on record sessions with Elvis or whoever, in background parts on studio dates. And he recommended me to a guitar player in Nashville who had gotten interested in jazz and wanted to make a jazz record. And he happened to mention to Boots that he liked the idea of playing with a vibraphone player, but there weren't any in Nashville. And Boots said, well, there's this kid up in Indiana. You might want to hear him. So one day we threw the vibes in the back of Boots's car and drove down to Nashville for the day. And Boots had a session that day, and I went along for the ride. And I played a couple of songs with this guitarist, Hank Garland, and seemed to like it. So he said, well, what are your plans? What's going on? I said, well, I'm in high school still, and I graduate in a couple of months, and then next fall I'm going to Boston to go to college. And so he said, well, move down to Nashville for the summer, and we'll play this club on weekends, and we'll make this record. And that's exactly what I did. So it got me started in the music business through a very much a backdoor way. You know, there I was in Nashville doing occasional record dates, country record dates even, where I would just play little parts in the background, and made this jazz record called Jazz Winds from a New Direction, which is a big favorite to this day with a lot of guitar players. And out of that summer, I also got offered my own record contract from RCA. Chet Akins ran the RCA division in Nashville at the time, and he had taken a liking to me. He would come down to the club that we played on weekends, and at the end of the summer, he talked RCA into offering me a contract. And so when I moved east, I had my own record contract as well. I was with RCA for about 8 years.
You know, that's very interesting because Chet Akins comes in a whole nother world. He actually was very responsible. He and Owen Bradley were very, very responsible for that whole 60s classic country sound. Yeah. What was it like working with him?
That's right. Well, very laid back, very relaxed guy. He had a very kind of slow, drawling kind of style of talking, and never moved very quick or anything. Just seemed to move at a nice, slow, steady pace. He was a wonderful player, and he really knew the essence of the music. I think when he listened to people's demo records, of which, if you're in the record business, you're just swamped with demos. He had a knack for spotting somebody who had original talent and would be both commercial and also something that I think he felt was artistically valid as well. He had a great ear for talent.
That'll do it again for the first part of my interview with vibraphonist Gary Burton here at the Blue Note here in New York City. As always, please visit my website, www.thepacereport.com, for my weekly column as well as my past segments. Until next time, remember, if it's in the groove, it'll make you move. Peace.